Where is the outrage for a young man, 19 years old, who was killed because he was an American? That's it. This kid was murdered because he was an American, and that's where the story should begin. That's where the discussion should take place, because domestic terrorism is here. It happened. Let this be the face that America sees and knows that domestic terrorism is already here.
Well, that's the voice of Todd Pettengill, host for the New York radio station WPLJ. He was among the first to draw attention to the case of murder victim Brendan Tevlin. He is on the left of your screen. On the right is his confessed killer, Ali Muhammad Brown. According to court documents, Brown says he murdered the innocent college freshman for, quote, vengeance. Buck Sexton is the national security editor of TheBlaze.com, and he is a former CIA officer and former NYPD Intelligence Division specialist. Buck, good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
So this guy is a confessed murderer of 4 people, 3 in Washington State, 1 in New Jersey, who was Brendan Tevlin, who you need to Google because he is the poster child, Brendan Tevlin, for what you want your child to grow up to be, from everything I've read. And he was gunned down like an animal in the street while just driving his car because Mr. Brown believed he deserved it thanks to the U.S. actions against Muslims. This is what Brown told the cops. So I ask you whether this is the future that we're going to need to deal with when it comes to ISIS, Al-Qaeda, or anybody else, this type of lone wolf terrorism that pops up and doesn't get called what it is.
It's absolutely the future, and it's something that we've been dealing with for years now, but the situation with ISIS has made it worse. ISIS's propaganda effort is pretty smooth, actually, using social media and just the internet in general. It's easy to essentially self-jihadize. You can decide that you want to become a jihadi just based upon your connection to the internet and your desire to connect with ISIS that way. Some of them go and fight there, but as you said, the lone wolf threat here, it already exists. It's getting worse right now. It's very difficult, by the way, to completely eradicate, no matter how much attention law enforcement and the intelligence community pays to it.
This is one of the biggest threats that law enforcement worries about because it's so hard to detect.
It is one of the biggest threats. One of the problems with it, though, is that particularly with this administration, there's this constant desire to say, well, because there's no outside terrorist entity that is perhaps sponsoring or directing this attack, it's not an act of terrorism. Well, that's just simply false. In fact, Al-Qaeda's propaganda efforts through Inspire magazine are directly meant to do just this, Megan. They're meant to take people who will take into their own hands, essentially, this jihadist philosophy and then act on it. That's the whole purpose.
I mean, he is a devout Muslim who described this murder as a just kill in response for the lives taken in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and Iran, called it vengeance and so on. And not only that, but he was convicted of bank fraud a couple of years ago, and the leader of that bank fraud ring was a terrorist. I mean, how much more do they need?
Well, this is again, people want to pretend for certain reasons, political reasons, that this is not the problem that it is. We saw workplace violence was the name that was attached to what happened at Fort Hood. Also with the shooting at the Arkansas recruiting station in 2009, that individual said he's a jihadist and that he did this on orders from Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. He was just charged with capital murder in that case. So we keep seeing these instances where people are radicalizing, are doing explicitly what Al-Qaeda is trying to get them to do. They had an article called How to Make a Bomb in the Kitchen of Your Mom. That's because they want people to do that. And when people act on it, whether it's Faisal Shahzad in the Times Square bombing of 2010 or others, there's
the
a
Boston
sense
bombers.
Or exactly, the Tsarnaev brothers, this is desire of, oh, they're just crazies. They have nothing to do with radical Islam. They have nothing to do with these terrorist organizations. That's just garbage, Megan. This is exactly what Al-Qaeda wants, and ISIS knows it. They know that they can already get people under our radar, and this is their best means right now to attack us in the homeland.
This poor young man and his family. Buck, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, another Homeland Security concern, the hundreds of Americans waging jihad overseas. We've documented this from Minnesota in particular, while still holding passports from the United States. Scott Brown is the Republican nominee for U.S. Senate in New Hampshire. He's a former senator from Massachusetts. And while he was in Congress, he introduced a bill to revoke the American citizenship of terrorists, which didn't go anywhere. Which, you know, Senator, you think, well, it seems pretty non-controversial, and yet it was. Why?
Well, politics always plays a role in the United States Senate, unfortunately. When you have a good idea, there are those who want to kill those ideas. It's something, actually, I was very thankful to see after I spoke to Ted Cruz that he, in fact, filed to make sure that we have, and we know that there are maybe 300 plus people fighting for ISIS. And what they've done is they've I think, given up their citizenship and left it at the door. And if they go back and forth, they're not coming back to the United States to buy a house with a white picket fence. They're coming back to hurt and kill us and change our way of life. So they can't hide behind the Constitution and the rights provided by our Constitution, and taking away that passport, their passports. Let's keep them there with their new friends.
It seems like they say, look, the reason the bill didn't go anywhere and the reason Ted Cruz's proposal has similar pushback is you can't just willy-nilly revoke the citizenship of somebody suspected to be a terrorist without giving them due process.
Well, with all due respect, it's not willy-nilly. I can see how people would like to belittle and demonize this opportunity to really make sure that we can protect our citizens. These are people who are online that we've identified who have said, we are going to go to the United States to march down Pennsylvania Avenue and plant a flag in the White House that we know are U.S. citizens who have taken up arms. We're not talking about, maybe we sort of kind of think. We know who they are. We've identified them through reliable sources beyond a reasonable doubt. At that point, they should not be given the protections of the United States because they have left them at the door. They have taken up arms to kill us and change our way of life. And if they want to stay in their country, their new country, then let's keep them there so they don't come back here to hurt our citizens.
It's like if we met these people on the battlefield over in Syria, we would bomb them. But if they show up at JFK with a U.S. passport, we welcome them.
Well, we have to fix it. If you don't think that we're under threat right now, as you know, I have said the border needs to be closed. It's too porous. We have had reports from Homeland that there are potential ISIS threats potentially moving forward. This is something where Senator Shaheen and I differ greatly. I voted to secure the border, voted for border troops. She hasn't. She supports the DREAM Act and the like. I would hope that before the Senate leaves for session, they do a couple of things. They take up the ability for us to close the border. It needs to be closed. We need to secure it, folks. It's a part of our national security and, quite frankly, our economic security. And they should also take up something like this when we know who these people are, to make sure that we can keep them there so they can't flow back and forth like they potentially can do and hide behind our citizenship and their rights guaranteed under the Constitution. They've left them, as I said, I hate to keep repeating it, they've left them at the door. They've given up that privilege.
Senator Brown is in a race right now against Democrat Jeanne Shaheen for this seat in New Hampshire, and we shall see. Right now she's leading you by a bit in the polls, but some say it's tighter than they expected.
No, that's
on the
not
other
true,
side.
but thank you.
Are you beating
Everything's
her?
going well, and we're working hard, and I appreciate the opportunity to get on.
All right, we're going to be watching come the midterm election. Senator, good to see you.
Good to see you too, Megan. Thank you.
Well, an outspoken defender of women's rights in Muslim countries is now coming under new fire. Remember this woman?
I have systematically been condemned by Muslim individuals, Muslim organizations, relatives. Any time that I bring up the treatment of women in Islam or the link between violence and violence justified in the name of Islam.
Well, they're trying to silence her again next.